today's agenda, we're going to be going over a quick kind of level 100 of what cybersecurity is, what Microsoft Secure Score is, how it's important, how it can help your environment, what the different features are, how it works, the customers most affected by this in the EDU sector, a day in the life of a security admin of someone that's had this implemented, the feature differences between A3 and A5, and next steps and resources. Let's go ahead and get this started. So I'm sure you've all heard the question or the term like, what is cybersecurity and how does that affect my environment? Well, cybersecurity is the practice of protecting critical systems and sensitive information from digital attacks. It's also known as information technology security, cybersecurity measures are designed to combat threats against network systems and applications, whether those threats originate from inside or outside of the network. So previously, before we went to the cloud, a lot of our networks were protected with a firewall on-prem. And a lot of times we had network access controllers or different pieces that would protect that information and would scan everything that would go out to the net. Well, now that everything's cloud-based, we have two different avenues to kind of think about and how we have to protect those institutions. And so cybersecurity is overall that journey that we're trying to do to where we're protecting those different infrastructures, whether it's on-prem or in the cloud. And security, honestly, it's kind of like oxygen. You don't really notice it, or that you don't really know that you don't need it until you don't have it. And so that's one of the big things that we always try and go over. Now, at the bottom of this PowerPoint, I also included the K-12 cyber incident map. And so I thought that was very helpful because over the past few years, a lot of times what will happen is if a breach has been detected, they'll typically put that on this website and they'll show what exactly was affected and, in some cases, what they had to do to remediate it. So what are some of the key terms within cybersecurity? Well, one of them is an incident. And an incident is something that that might have potentially happened. You're not 100% sure, but you're looking into it. A compromise is that something bad actually has happened, and that some sort of information or a computer or some sort of asset's been damaged. A breach is where you've gotten final confirmation that, yes, a compromise has happened and a breach has occurred and information has left the organization. Now, we typically don't like to use the word breach because, like I said earlier on that K-12 map, the second that the word breach starts to be used, we start to have to think about laws and what's required by all of our different educational institutions of what we have to follow. So another big part of that too is, if you have a legal team, what that looks like, and do you have a plan in place to work through that process? If not, if it's through the state, what does the state require you to do? Another key term is ransomware and how that functions. So ransomware specifically is designed to block access to computer systems until a sum of money is paid. So typically you'll see this come through like mail, and an attachment will come through, someone will double click it, and it tries to install something on the machine, and it forces pop-ups that say, warning, your computer has been hacked. Unless you pay money to us, we're going to release your information. That's what typically ransomware is referring to. Now, malware takes that a little bit of a step further, and it will actually damage the machine. So it gets installed, it starts to access different system level functions, it starts to look and see what's on the machine, and it tries to see, oh, hey, I can spread myself through the other different parts of this environment and collect and collate more information. And then a hack is just merely gaining access to a computer system. So that could be Google Workspace, that could be Office 365, that could be an on-prem file share. That could pertain to anything in terms of a hack. Now, one big hacking example I'm sure you've all probably heard of was Target was hit a few years ago, and hackers got in. They released a lot of the credit card information that showed up on the back end web. And I'm sure that you've heard of instances like this. Well, one of the things that could have prevented this was multi-factor authentication. And just by trying to work through cybersecurity and implementing some of these different technologies, you can help prevent 99% or sometimes even more of the different types of situations and security incidents that you're seeing. Now, like I said earlier, cybersecurity is a journey and it's never going to be 100%. But slowly over time, you can work on getting yourself up to that point where you feel comfortable in the environment, you've got a regular cadence of, here's the different things I'm looking at, here's the investigations and reports I'm trying to make sure I'm protecting, and then making sure that you've got remediation steps. And then if something does happen, education sector, what the kind of vulnerabilities that we've noticed are, and kind of the different systems that people are typically attacking in the EDU sector. So Garrett, I'll hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Tyler. If you'll advance to the next slide. Perfect. Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, wherever you may be. Yeah, as Tyler mentioned, right, we know that security remains a moving target, that cybersecurity attacks and threats continue to evolve. And I find it very interesting to help you understand what are the current threats that Microsoft is seeing in education environments across not just the nation, but the world, right? And some of the biggest threats that we see today are ransomware. So we need to have good practices for recovery in place for any attacks that come through with ransomware. We're also seeing social engineering attack, like phishing attacks. This tends to be the number one when I'm talking with school districts. That phishing seems to be the biggest one. I'm sure you're all familiar with gift card scams and things like that, where teachers are saying, hey, you've won a $50 Apple gift card. Click here to claim your reward. And then they're prompted to put in their credentials to a fake, like even Microsoft 365 page, right? That something looks very familiar, and they'll go ahead and put in their secure credentials. And those credentials are automatically compromised. So phishing is one of the top ones. We do see denial of service attacks, some third-party vulnerabilities, and even cloud computing vulnerabilities. But I would say that ransomware and phishing are probably the two biggest ones. And so when you think about your systems, you want to think about not only the detection side of things, right? How are we actually actively detecting these threats in our environment? But then how are we responding to these threats? If you'll go to the next slide, please. And so one of the things that I always like to talk about is the cyber resilience bell, or cybersecurity bell curve. This is a great visual to help you understand that if you just put into place proper cybersecurity hygiene, that you will have the greatest protection available. This isn't stuff that's necessarily difficult all the time to put into place, but it does take work, and it does take some energy and efficient manners to just manage the technology and practice in your environment. So what are some of these things? Number one, use virus protection, right? Use an anti-malware, a modern anti-malware system in place for your systems. This is going to span across all your devices, Windows, Mac, iOS, Android, servers, all of the devices that you have in your device estate. You want to ensure that you've got a modern anti-malware system on those devices, and that you're actually updating it with the latest definition file updates, right? Pretty simple, but you want to make sure that all your devices are covered. The next one is apply least privilege access. One of the things that I like to talk about is this notion of zero trust. So if you hear the terms zero trust, this is more of an industry term, but Microsoft has their own deployment method for zero trust and leveraging Microsoft technologies. But zero trust is really founded on three key principles. One is apply least privilege access. So ensuring that our users have the right amount of access when they need it, and only the access that they need to do their job, right? So looking through, do we need to have all of our teachers be local admins on the devices, or can they be standard users, right? We want to make sure that they're standard users and not local admins. That's one of the key pillars of zero trust. The other ones are, you've heard the term, right? Trust but verify. In a zero trust model, it's never trust, always verify. That's where some of these things like multi-factor authentication comes into play, where we are going to say, yep, we see that you are who you say you are, and that you're accessing this device from a known device or a managed device, but I'm just going to validate just to be sure with a second form of authentication. This could be done with an SMS text message. This could be with a phone call, an email, or an authenticator app, right, on your mobile device. And then finally, that last pillar of zero trust is, wow, I'm totally blanking right now because it's not right in front of me. But ensuring that you are governing your data and ensuring that data is protected. And so, so really thinking about the information that you have in your district, right? You've got a lot of great, rich student information, which is personal data, right? You've got social security numbers, you've got bank accounts, you've got lots of good HIPAA information, health information for students. So you are chock full of data on a lot of financials, and they can sell this data onto the dark web. So it's your job to kind of protect that. And then finally, keeping versions up to date. And we say keeping versions up to date, it's kind of ambiguous, right? But that means operating systems, that means applications, that means firmware on devices, just patching your systems across the board, ensuring that you're not just saying, oh, well, that's a domain controller. I'm not going to apply those patches because I can't restart it because it's going to take down the network for a little bit of time, right? Gone are those days, right? We need to ensure that we are patching our systems regularly and ensuring that the latest versions are there. And so really, if you look at that, if you just do proper basic security hygiene, those 5 main things, you are going to protect yourself against 98% of attacks. 98%, like that's pretty good coverage, right? And even today, we're seeing like school districts and higher education systems required to have cybersecurity insurance. This is the stuff that's going to help you meet those needs and lower those premiums too. You'll notice that it's a bell curve, right? So the last two at the end, the 1% outlier attacks, that's what I like to think of as sophisticated attacks. I think there's often a notion that, we need to have the best of the best out there, best of breed products to protect ourselves from against these really sophisticated attacks. But honestly, attackers are like water, right? They're going to take the path of least resistance, right? Think about security as like a front door. They're going to try to get into the front door of a house. If it's locked, they're just going to move on to the next house. They're not going to try to jump the fence and go around to the back, right? They're going to take the path of least resistance. It's going to get them the most amount of bang for their buck, right? So if you just think about basic security hygiene, this is going to protect you from 98% of those attacks. Again, those 2% outlier attacks are those sophisticated attacks. So this is a great slide to kind of summarize what we're going to talk about and how the secure score that Tyler mentioned earlier will help you. So Tyler, if we can go to the next slide. Again, proper cybersecurity hygiene will help you have good posture management, but it's also going to require visibility across a variety of things in your environment, right? The technology itself, what do you have in your environment? Do you know what's in your environment? Step number 1, right? Know what's in your environment. What tools do you have at your disposal to help you actually increase that security posture in your environment and help you get more secure? What processes do you have in place in your environment? So again, looking at our detection phase and looking at our respond phase, do we have processes or protocols in place for if and when there is a breach, we know what we need to be doing? And then finally, our users, right? I come from a school district. I always made a joke, whether it's appropriate or not. I didn't have 30,000 students on my network. I had 30,000 hackers. That's how I approached our student population. I know that they collectively are smarter than I am, right? And there's no way that as one person, I can ensure that I have thought about every single scenario where I've made it foolproof for any student to get in. When you think about insider risk protocols and things like that, users, number 1. So especially in school districts where you have large populations of students. So again, just thinking about cybersecurity hygiene, you've got to have visibility across your landscape, right? If we'll go to the next slide. And then when you start looking at that, it gets to be overwhelming. You have to think about identity and access management. You have to think about information rights, email security, endpoint protection, data loss prevention, threat detection, right? There's so much that you have to think about. And so the Microsoft Suite, and this is really what we're going to get into today, is instead of having a best of breed solution or a lot of point solutions in your environment that help to create parts and pieces of helping managing these various levels of posture management and assessment in your environment, the Microsoft Suite and what you get into it It's just there's so much that can help you automate this and help create a simplified experience for your security administrators, provide you a lot of great reporting and visibility. We'll talk a little bit about the signal sharing between our products and how that works. But just know that when it comes to security, there's a lot to think about, and the Microsoft team is here to help you. Our products are here to help you create a solid solution in your environment. We know that cybersecurity is a journey. It's a never-ending journey, but we are here to help you with that. Next slide. So this is where the Microsoft Secure Score comes into play. I would love a little reaction if you're in Teams today. Throw up a thumbs up if you have heard of Microsoft Secure Score, if you're actively using it today. But the Secure Score is a measurement of an organization's security posture. I love it. There's a couple of thumbs ups going on. It's a really neat tool that's automatically integrated into your environment, and it's going to present you with a score. You can see in the screenshot that the big bold letters says Secure Score 53.46%. In this example here, the security posture from a Microsoft perspective is that you have tightened up your security controls in your environment up to a point of 53.46%. So it's going to give you a real score, a measurable score that is going to provide you, it's going to start providing you little tidbits of here's where maybe you need to focus on, right? So visibility, assessment, and guidance to really strengthen that security posture in your environment. So again, this is going to take into account identity, right? All of your user accounts. It's going to take into account devices. It's going to take into account information, apps, and even the infrastructure within your environment. And then what's really neat about it is that it'll actually give you some intelligent guidance. So it'll identify where to improve your security score, and then we'll actually tell you, here's how to go do it, right? This is one of our fundamental tool sets to say, here's where you are in your environment. Here are the tools that you need and the instructions you need to heighten your security posture. And then finally, comprehensive controls, right? It's all integrated together. So again, taking in signals from Office 365, from your file sharing capabilities, from Teams, OneDrive, your devices, if you're using Intune to manage your devices, mobile devices even, right? Not just Windows devices, but iOS, iPadOS, macOS, right? We're going to take all those signals and we're going to present you with a really comprehensive score. And then we'll dig into this a little bit. We'll do some demos, but it's just a very foundational view of your environment, and then key takeaways to say, okay, what can I start focusing on? Where am I good? Where am I not so good? And then we can start taking action and come up with a plan. If you'll go to the next slide, please. This is just some of some quotes and tidbits from other companies that are leveraging Microsoft Secure Score. So again, it's really designed to help organizations improve that security posture and provide that even up against benchmarks and KPIs that you create in your own environment. So some really great quotes from big companies like IBM or Avante who are using Secure Score to really help measure what the security posture is in their environment and how they can align it to their goals. Next slide, please. And then finally, the need for Secure Score. We talked about that cybersecurity bell curve. 98% of attacks can be prevented if you have proper cyber hygiene in place, right? This is where you can start asking yourself some of those tougher questions. Things like, do I have too many global admins in my environment, right? Hey, you should only have like 2 or 3. If you have more, then we can start putting role-based access control in place, right? And start limiting that access, going back to that zero trust principle of using least privilege access. And do I only have the rights that I need to do my job at the right time? Are your users protecting data using data loss prevention, right? Do we want to make sure social security numbers and credit card information isn't going across the wire unprotected? Are you managing shadow IT and application usage, right? Do you know what kind of applications your students are using? Are they using VPNs? Are they using other web browsers that bypass your content filters? Things like that you need to be aware of. Are you using multi-factor authentication? all of your global admins should be automatically MFA'd. Your superintendents, your VIPs is what I like to call them, right? Superintendents, principals, assistant superintendents, curriculum instruction, business office, finance, all of those individuals should automatically be MFA'd. Students is a little more challenging, but there's nothing to say that you can't put out campaigns out there that say, hey, you know what? You could get a free candy bar during school registration if you go do a self-service into MFA, right? If you can protect one more user than you have protected before, then you're heightening your security posture. Do I have outdated or deprecated protocols enabled in my environment? TLS 1.0, basic auth with IMAP and POP services for email, right? These are the questions that you want to ask. And this is what SecureScore can actually help you visualize and then take action on. And you can say, look, we detected that TLS 1.1 or 1.0 is enabled in your environment. Let's go turn it off. And here's how to do it. Next slide. And then finally, yep, just some companies that are using SecureScore, right? This is a trusted tool across commercial and education customers. Big customers like Visa, IBM, Nestle, GM are all using the SecureScore. And we have a lot of higher ed and K-12 customers, large K-12s, also using the SecureScore as a daily visual, right? We'll talk a little bit about the day in the life of a security admin, but how you can leverage the SecureScore in your environment to create that daily habit of just checking what's my environment at, and even comparing it with organizations of similar size to kind of see where you fall into the map of. So with that, I will turn it back over to Tyler. I think he's going to do a little bit deeper dive into SecureScore.
Yeah, thanks so much, Garrett. That was so helpful. Yes, so we're going to do a little bit of a deeper dive. Now, the slide after this does have a video, so I'm going to have to kind of double click through it real quick. And I kind of wanted you to watch this like on your own time when you had a chance, but it kind of goes into like a deeper discussion on what SecureScore is, how like cybersecurity is important in your environments, and kind of how Microsoft is trying to help, push us towards those initiatives. Come on. There we go. All right, so SecureScore is a great way to help you assess what your security posture looks like. All right, it gives you a great piece to look at your entire real estate. Now, keep in mind, SecureScore is only as powerful as much of data that you're ingesting into it. So like Garrett was saying earlier, when you have a number of security solutions that are kind of piecemeal together and they're all kind of separated out, it's really hard to see what's going on into an environment. As you integrate things more and more into SecureScore, it gives you a nice a single pane of glass to look at everything in your environment. It breaks it down by categories, and products and security solutions. So that way, it's not just like a whole big thing that shows you like, hey, here's all the problems that are in your environment, fix them now. It actually show you like, here are the ones that are a major situation that you probably want to take care of quickly. Here are some that, they're not as common. They might not be even in your environment, but it's something to make sure that you're aware of. And it also gives you a nice way to compare yourself to other organizations that are in around that same size of how many active accounts are in that institution. And what's nice is with SecureScore, it actually will show you on the EDU side, it'll actually show you what you rate, and it won't give you their names, but it will show you in terms of size, like how other educational institutions are doing. So it's nice to be able to go into this portal and say, hey, here's where like other institutions in this size range are doing, and here's where their SecureScore is at. So that kind of gives you that avenue to be able to say, hey, we probably should be looking into this. You can use this to prioritize the improvements in your environment. What's really nice is, and as you can see, is it breaks down all the different pieces, and you see this percentage point increases based on what it is. So it's really nice to be able to actually quantify what you're doing versus, all right, well, today I know I updated the servers, but I don't really know how much that improved my environment or what that really did. So it's really nice to almost kind of feel like it's giving you a pat on the back. Like, all right, I did this, so now I got my security score up a little bit higher because I implemented this. It'll allow you to prioritize things. Like I was saying earlier, the higher the threat that it sees it, the higher of a percentage point that it's going to give you in terms of like the percentage scores. And then it gives you nice, intelligent guidance and comprehensive control. So like I was saying earlier, like this is like a very nice single pane of glass system and it's also very intelligent. So one of the things that Microsoft systems are kind of really known for, and you can see us on the Gartner chart, we are actually we have databases that sit there and constantly pull and look at what's going on the internet. And it says, hey, this IP address is a botnet for command and control. And our data sets all ingest all of that. And we give you access to that via these portals. So that way you can use that information to help protect your environment. You can use this to drive posture improvements. So say, for example, you've been dealing with this for a long time, and higher ups are like, do we really need to deal with this? This probably isn't a security system that we need to worry about, or well, we won't really worry about it until a breach has occurred. Well, this will give you a nice way to sit there and say, hey, but if I do this, this will help improve our security score and it'll help improve our environment in this way. It gives you a really great way to quantify what you're doing. It also gives you nice real-time monitoring. So the more that you ingest into this system, the more that you actually have access to. And it's really nice to be able to see things in real time as they're happening, because in a lot of environments that what we notice, something's starting to happen, well, some sort of phishing campaign has happened, and your email system and check what's going on there, see what the logs show. Okay, well, some of it probably got through, so now you're having to go over to your endpoint systems and see what's happening there. Well, and now it's probably spread from your endpoints into your server infrastructure. And so now you've got to go over into what solution you're using to monitor that. And what's really nice is as you get all of these different systems pulled together and all mitigated through the Microsoft security solutions, it gives you a really nice way to see it all together in real time. It also gives you historical reports so that you can track and maintain your progress. Because like we were saying earlier, cybersecurity is a journey. It's not something that you can do overnight. There might be times where you regress a little bit, where you might not have had as much time to sit there and work towards some of these security initiatives. And then there will be months where you've been able to patch every single thing that it's brought up, and you've been able to make sure that you're doing everything that you want to do in terms of security. It's about an ebb and a flow. So, and like I was talking about earlier, with those historical reports and those projected scores, you can actually export those reports and use those to take to leadership and say, hey, here's the report I'm showing. If we do this, 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 and this is the improvements that we'll see across our environment. That way, you're not just saying it to them, you can give them quantifiable data that they can see and see how it's going to impact their environment. And that's really nice, because a lot of times, I'm sure you're aware of Event Viewer. Like, when someone says like there's an authentication issue on-prem and that there's maybe a hack going down, what are you typically doing? If you don't have a third-party solution, you're trying to go into Event Viewer, tracking down audit logs and trying to go through everything. It's a very, very painful process to try and see what's going on. But when it's all ingested into this system, it gives you a really nice way to see what's going on, what's the history, where's my projected scores, and then how I compare to other environments. And just overall, it just gives you that nice way to even see what's going on both on-prem and in the cloud. Now, who are the customers most affected by this? Well, in the education side, if you have a CISO, and that's typically what we see at the university level, but at the K through 12, you're going to have IT directors, curriculum directors, special education, your network managers, systems administrators, and your board of education. And the reason that these are listed in here, what I've noticed over the years is these are typically the job titles that hackers are targeting. And the reason being is these job titles typically have access to more important types of information, such as social security numbers, HIPAA information, all sorts of things that hackers really want to get into. Because at the end of the day, it's almost a little bit easier to hack student information, because a lot of them don't know what's going on with their credit as an adult yet. And so a lot of times, the students don't even know anything's occurred because they're not actively monitoring that stuff like an adult might be. And so a lot of hackers will typically try and hack educational institutions as well, because they know, hey, educational institutions probably don't have as much funding as enterprise does, so they're probably not patching their systems as effectively. And so they think, oh, well, that's probably low-hanging fruit. That's a target that I can hit. That's a target that I'm going to get information from, and I can sell it and advertise it. And so it's always important to kind of think about this and to understand when you're going through this, you don't have to do this overnight. you can implement security and policies and maybe start with your IT department, maybe start with your director level positions and work your way up from there. It doesn't have to be overnight. So a day in the life of the security admin. All right, so once you've implemented these security solutions and everything's all set up, what are you supposed to do every day? Well, typically in these systems, like I was showing earlier, you're going to review and see what it currently recommends in the environment. It's going to show you any concerning areas and stuff that you might want to improve on. From there, you're going to go through, see the history, and I'm going to be showing you more of this in slides after this. I'm just kind of going over a high level of what you'll be seeing. And then you'll be able to see those regressions in that history chart. So that way you can say, hey, I didn't patch this Java thing on my servers, and unfortunately I've regressed this month because I haven't applied any other security. It'll help you stay ahead of them. So that way, in case it sees that, hey, it starts to notice that you haven't been able to take as much time and to be able to implement some of the security. It'll give you recommendations on ways to maybe make it a little bit better. And then from there, if it's something that you really aren't worried about and you know for a fact, like this is something that is not something I need to worry about, you can always just click the accept risk button and it'll log it for you, but you at least you've at least put in the system that someone accepted this risk. And then, but that also gives you a nice way to quantify it, because say in case a security incident does occur, you can go into the system and say, hey, so-and-so approved it at this point and says this wasn't a problem. And so that way you have logistics tracking in terms of what you can see in the environment and who's doing what. Now, once you've kind of looked and seen what's in the environment previously and where you're going, you're going to want to try and find ways to improve your security score. So in there, it's going to show you different things that you can do, and then you can use those to create tasks. Now, what's nice is if you do use To Do and Tasks in Planner today, there's actually little buttons in the console that let you like drag and drop it over. So it makes it a little bit easier to create like tasks and stuff of what you need to do every day. And then from there, you're going to want to see, what do I need to worry about? What is the exposure rate that I need to take into consideration? Am I moving files from on-prem to the cloud? And do I need to make sure I have the proper policies in place that are protecting that? Maybe I want to use conditional access. Maybe I want to make sure I use trusted locations. So that way only people can access that data from a particular place. Those are the types of things I'm going to start to think about as a security admin. Then from there, I'm going to probably think, all right, long-term, over the year, what are my large security projects going to be? What am I going to work on? And then over time, work at those projects. Cybersecurity, once again, it's not an overnight thing. It's a journey. It's going to take time. And so when you put these projects together, it gives you a really nice way to sit there and track over time. All right, this is the project I'm working on. I need to make sure by the end of the year that I patch this certain vulnerability on my servers. And I can't do it right now because it's currently testing season. But at least I have a project for it, and I know to pick it up when it's left off. Because I know we all know how this is when we get super busy with the school year, and we just think, oh man, I got to get through student testing. That's the only thing I care about. And then a lot of our other projects fall by the wayside. This system gives you a really nice way to track all of that and keep yourself, in the know. From there, once you've done all of that, you can start preparing reports to start showing your CISOs and your other administrators. Give you a nice, clear way to go through over time, and every month, if you wanted to, print off a report and show them those improvements. And it's really nice over time because you can also use these reports and show them to the insurance companies and say, hey, here's where I'm at, here's what I've implemented. Is there any chance you can give me a discount because I've implemented these technologies? And it never hurts to ask the question. Because when I was doing this as a tech director, originally I had that issue where I had to implement MFA or they were going to drop my insurance. Just plain and simple, that's what they told me. Well, I implemented MFA. And they're like, oh, well, you have a bunch of information in your financial system. So we want to see that you've got BitLocker encryption on all of your devices. And I'm like, all right, well, I guess I've got to figure that part out. So implemented it, made sure I had all of that reporting pulled together in Secure Score, showed them, and they're like, okay, now that you've implemented that, we'll discount it by 1 or 2%. And then they gave me a list of all these little pieces that I had to follow. And some of them I had to do. Some of them were just, they were nice haves. But I noticed over time, the more of them that I covered, the less my insurance charged me. Now, obviously, I can't say that's universal to every insurance company. But typically, when you think about insurance, if you're lowering the vulnerabilities in your environment and you're lowering the impact, they're not going to think that you're as a high risk, which means they're typically not going to charge you more. So what are some of the main takeaways from this? Well, you're going to be able to see any emergent threats in this environment. It's going to be really nice because in case, say for example, there is a new piece of malware and it's starting to hit a bunch of different educational institutions, it's going to warn you in this panel and say, hey, here's something that you probably need to take care of and probably be aware of before this starts to hit all of our different organizations. You can review the security posture in here. You can improve your security posture and score over time, and you can repair those reports for your organization's leadership. Now from here, I'm going to go into some slides of what this system looks like, what the different breakdowns are, and do a little bit of a demo of what this stuff looks like. So that way I'm not just like putting words to, or I'm not just talking about it. So that way you can actually see it. So right here is Microsoft Secure Score, and this is what it looks like. So right now this institution's at 30%. You can see below it's broken down by category on the left-hand side. So we've got identity, data, devices, apps, and infrastructure. And then from there, we can see on the right-hand side here in the middle, this is our dashboard that shows us. Okay, well, it looks like from the last time we were in here, we've had 2 regressions. We've got 6 past due things that we haven't taken care of, and there's 102 of them that we haven't even worked on. So this kind of gives me a baseline to understand, all right, there's nothing urgent I have to deal with today. So I don't have to deal with any sort of panicking episode or trying to figure out what's going on. I now know I just need to look at my regressions and what I'm past due on and what I need to work on. So from there, and yeah, so it'll show you the regressions and the history of it and if there's been any issues over time. And as you can see over here, here's what the past due looks like. And the vulnerability in Java, IBM WebSphere RCE attack, stuff like this. These are different pieces that you can patch or stuff that it'll give you recommendations on what to do in that environment. And it shows you, all right, it's past due. This is when this started to become a problem, and this is when I need to take care of it. All right, and really quick, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to pull up another quick PowerPoint that has more of these slides. So give me 1 second. All right. And there are quite a few slides on this, so I'm only going to be thumbing through it just so you can get kind of the visibility of what the system looks like. All right. Garrett, am I good? Can they see okay?
Yeah, you're good.
All right, perfect. Sometimes my screen gets a little bit reversed. All right, awesome. All right, so here's the same plane that we were looking at before. Here we can see there's 58 different things in this environment to address. And I'm just going to slowly click through here just so you can kind of see what this looks like, just the day in the life of an admin and what they deal with every day. You can see that it breaks down by apps, infrastructure, and how the different points break down. And I do have a slide that explains like the breakdown and how it all pulls together. Should do this a little bit slower, but I know we're a little bit short on time. Yeah, as you can see here, like here's the score, here's the improvement that it's going to make. You've planned this to do this, or this is something that you still have yet to address. Do you have the licenses for the technology? That's another nice thing too about this. So it'll actually tell you whether or not you have the licenses in the system to actually implement the fixes. And I'll actually show you too, and I forgot the product that's actually doing this. And we can filter things. Okay. And right here, so here's an action plan that we're creating. All right, this is our update status. We're trying to require MFA for administrative roles. This is planned. And we can see here, all right, here's our next steps. Here's what we need to do. See our history of that. You see, Over time, it gives you a nice chart. Here's where I was previously, maybe 90 days ago, and even longer than that. And then you can get a nice big chart over time so that you can see over the year how much you've improved or regressed. Yep, and I'll go back real quick. The organizations like yours tab. I always used that because it was nice, because whenever I had to go to like my leadership, they'd always give me the question, well, what are other organizations doing? Do we really need to worry about this? Is this something that we need to actually take care of? And I can go, well, we're at 43% and other institutions my size are at 56%. Maybe we should look into doing that. And that was just another kind of avenue I could use to kind of help push those security initiatives. Okay. All right, so that's just a quick overview and what you can see in the secure score systems. Let me get back to that other PowerPoint.
Yeah, while you're pulling that up, Tyler, I think the one slide where you showed where you can actually click into those tasks and drill a little bit more into it. There's a lot of power into that, right? You can see what users are impacted when it comes to like identity, or areas that may impact those users more than others. So you could actually see how it affects your students more than your staff. But again, it's going to link you out. It's going to say, here are the steps that you need to take to implement this and shore up your security posture in this particular task. But it's going to link you out to documentation, right? It's going to link you out to everything that you need to ensure that you understand what the change is and how you can communicate that to your stakeholders, right? So even if you use this tool more from an assessment perspective and just say, look, this is where I'm currently at, and these are the things that I know I need to do, it's going to give you that map to help you then prioritize, right? When you think about basic change management processes in your district or your organization, right? There's an impact for everything. How do we measure that impact? And the secure score, I mean, when you drill into those individual tasks, you get all of that data to help you prioritize. So I would encourage you to go just security.microsoft.com. This is where you can access the secure score. Go look and see what's out there, right? Go see one of your actions and then actually see what would it take for me to heighten my posture. What is how much am I going to elevate my score by this, right? And it'll give you all of that data. So I'm just underscoring when you drill into each of those tasks, like we are supporting you along the whole way, right? This is free for you to use. All individuals have access to Secure Score. So even though you couldn't complete all the tasks unless you have certain licenses, you at least have an idea of planning your roadmap and how you can get there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, almost think of it as like a helpful hand that's kind of guiding you through this process. Yeah. Like, it's not trying to force you into anything. It's just like, hey, here are some of the ways that you can help improve your security posture. And thank you, Garrett. And so here's the breakdown that I was talking about earlier and kind of how it's broken up. So we've got identity, devices, data, apps, and infrastructure. And underneath that, we can kind of see how that's broken up. So under identity, we've got Azure Active Directory and Azure Advanced Threat Protection. And I know ATP is kind of being migrated into Defender for Endpoint, but it's still a little bit under identity in terms of like tracking like risks associated with like who's signing in and where they're signing in from, and if anything looks anomalous. And then from there, we've got devices, and that's Microsoft Defender for Endpoint. And that is what is more or less the cloud version of antivirus and making sure that it's removing different malware, viruses, and other things from your machines. Data, so that's the Microsoft Information Protection and Governance pieces. So those are the compliance modules. And under apps, we've got our Cloud App Security, SharePoint, Exchange, OneDrive, and Teams. And then for infrastructure, that's talking about our Azure Security Center and then our on-premises infrastructure as well. And that comes into that part of the score. Now, I always get asked this question a lot of, the A3 versus A5 feature breakdown and what you kind of get and what are the biggest features. So I created this slide to kind of break down, here's A3, here's some of the biggest features that we include from a cybersecurity perspective to kind of help your environments. And then on the right-hand side, we have the A5 modules and everything that kind of includes. And so I typically like to go over on the A5 side. So if you're on A3 today and you're looking at or considering A5, here's the different technologies and how they break down. So you've got Defender for Office 365, Defender for Identity, and Defender for Endpoint. And to kind of go back real quick to kind of help people understand, so you see this identity piece. So on the left-hand side, so Defender for Identity is what covers this. And then devices, that would be Defender for Endpoint. And then Defender for Office 365 is everything else. So our apps, data, and our infrastructure. Now, what do we get with Defender for Office 365? Now, what I have listed here is a smaller chunk, but these are typically the largest things that I see educational institutions ask me about. So safe attachments. That is the technology where when an attachment comes in through your email system, it scans it and it says, hey, is this malicious? Is this something that we need to make sure that we're quarantining? And gives you policies and procedures to remove those attachments from your Exchange console. Safe links. That's referring to the technology that allows you to lock down the different URL links that might come through like an email. It might be on a Word document. It could be in a Teams chat, whatever it might be. It scans that link before the person goes to it, and it makes sure that whatever website or wherever it ends up going, that it's a safe and protected link that they can access. Safe documents, that's referring to all the different documents in your environment and making sure that in case, student plugs in a flash drive and they're like, man, I'm going to mess with that kid next to me. I'll just upload that malware to Teams and I'll send it to him, and I bet he'll double click on it. Well, what's nice about safe documents is when you have it activated and policies implemented, it'll auto remediate and auto remove that out of the environment if you allow it. And then from there, we've got our M365 protection suite and our anti-phishing. So what's really nice about that is say, for example, you're working on the security posture and you're working on improving this. And you know that you've got to deal with a bunch of different levels of a bunch of different people that have varying technology levels. You can use this to simulate an attack in your environment and say, and you can make it look like however you can actually structure it and make it look a particular way, send it out to your entire environment, and then you'll get a report to see who failed. And what's really nice about that is it gives you a really nice report that says, hey, we probably need to increase some of the training in these areas because these users, unfortunately, are failing. And that way, too, it gives you a nice way over time to increase that security posture because you're implementing those training regimens. You also get real-time reports. I always like to say the A3 model is more of a reactive system where as things come in, you make manual changes. Whereas with the A5 system suites, real-time reports give you the ability to deal with things in real time. Now from there, we've got Defender for Identity. And then we've got, and kind of the big feature of that is automated identity protection. And what's really nice about this is, so like I was talking about earlier, if somebody signs into an account and say, for example, Microsoft sees that they've signed in from China, they've signed in from Russia, they've signed in from Italy, and they've signed in from Texas, for example. All right. Well, right then and there, if your organization's based in Chicago, for example, you probably already know that something's like fishy with that. Like people shouldn't be trying to sign in from those locations. So you can use automated identity protection to use that risk-based security score and say, hey, if so-and-so ends up being compromised, or if I've got some sort of threat level that says this is where they're compromised, you can actually tell it to say, hey, run them through the self-service password reset module. Or hey, if they want to access this, they have to go through another layer of MFA to gain access to it. So it's a really nice way to be able to automate some of the account issues that you might be dealing with today. And then the final piece of this is for Defender for Endpoint, and that's what's going to protect your endpoint environments, your workstations. Now, there is also Defender for Servers, and I want to preface that they're two very different things. So Defender for Endpoint is what you push out to your workstations, and Defender for Servers is what you'll push out to your server infrastructure. Now, it will all still show up under one single pane of glass, But the actual pieces for Defender for Server, that is actually done through an Azure commit. That and the older licensing SKUs for that, where it's Defender for Server P1 and P2, that's all done through an Azure commit now. So in case you are on those older SKUs, definitely reach out to your Microsoft representative so we can make sure that we've got you licensed. So from here, just to break down, and we won't go into this too deeply, but here's what you get with A3, because I always know people ask me, like, what are the specific nitty-gritty features and security that I get with A3? And one of the biggest things I like to always let people know, A3 gives you access to conditional access policies, which allows you to lock things down and protect your environment. You can require MFA, force password resets, block legacy authentication methods. There's so many different controls that you can use with this. And what a lot of my EDU customers don't know, if you tell like your other environments, like if you've got AWS or Google Workspace or whatever it might be, to use Azure as the identity provider, and you create conditional access policies, those other systems have to follow your conditional access policies too, because your authentication requests are being processed in Azure. They're not being processed in many different other systems. So this doesn't only protect our environment, this can protect other environments when they're pointed towards our IDP. And that is included in A3 today. What about A5? So like I was talking about earlier, A5 is all about that automation, advanced heuristics. I always like to say that, A3, it's only got certain access to resources and processing power. And then once you get up to the A5 level, it's a little bit more intelligent. It's a little bit more responsive. It's a little bit more reactive. And here's all the breakdown of what you'll get in the A5 upgrade plans. Now, this is the licensing piece I wanted to bring up just because I always get asked these questions. We're not licensing representatives, so you'll have to reach out for your DSRs for this, but I at least wanted to break down what the features are included in some of these step-ups. So if you're on A3 today, there's the A5 security and the A5 compliance step-ups, and this is what it's including. And it's really important that you kind of look at this because during your cybersecurity journey, you might only be working on your endpoints for the first year and implementing those security pieces and working on that. So for the first year, you might be on the A5 security add-on. But then say after a year, you've worked through that and finished it, well, now I've got to figure out what to do about my on-prem file shares. And now I've got to worry about moving my data and then protecting that data. So now you might have to think, oh, well, now I might need to use the A5 compliance add-on. And then at that point, probably consider moving up to the full A5 product stack altogether. So I just wanted to show you a breakdown of those two different pieces and how that's licensed.
And to add on really quick, I mean, going back to the Secure Score product, right, Tyler? I mean, we can leverage the Secure Score tasks and everything that it's telling us to help us prioritize. And then you can actually kind of align that with your existing licensing and then kind of come up with that plan to help you be most cost efficient and get the most bang for your buck, right? There's no need to upgrade to something that you're not going to take full advantage of unless you have that priority or you know that you can adopt that or successfully implement it. And so, use the Secure Score to actually help you prioritize those tasks with what your current licensing is, and then use that to eventually build the case to move up. And you could even leverage, just looking at your entire ecosystem, right, and say, okay, well, maybe I could actually displace this product or displace this product, and then go all in with A5 to help you actually have some cost savings. So again, Secure Score has that additional value of helping you maybe even save some money.
Yeah, and what I wanted to bring up too with this as well is like years ago when I was going through all of this, I initially started with A3 in my environments as well. And when I was going through my data audits, I noticed that I was starting to get like requests and DMCA takedown requests. And I'm like, man, what is going on here? Like, I don't have videos stored in my office environment. There's nothing in here. And then I go and find out like, wow, this is all being stored in my Google Workspace environment that's under my student accounts. And I go into that system and I'm like, where did this all come from? What ended up happening was for the past few months before that, hackers had gotten into our student accounts because at the lower grade levels, they were simple passwords, blue, yellow, green, whatever. And they were getting in and they were using our students' accounts on the Google Workspace side as a relay. So they were literally storing hacked videos, putting it on our Google infrastructure environment, and then streaming it through another like third-party source. And that's where all those DMCA takedown requests were coming from. And I noticed I went into the console, they tried to do that to the Microsoft accounts too, but that was denying their authentication requests because of my conditional access policies. And on top of that, it was giving me reporting and saying, hey, there are people trying to sign into these accounts, and there's this data is being written to it. And so it was really nice being able to see, like, hey, on the Microsoft side, I'm getting reporting of what's happening with my data and what's going on. Whereas on my Google Workspace side, I wasn't getting any of that information. By the end of it, they had stored 5 petabytes. I'm not gigabytes, not terabytes. They had stored 5 petabytes in my Google Workspace environment. Google sent me a $133,000 bill and said, either you pay for this or we're shutting off your Google Workspace environment because you've got hacked videos in it. And I had to work with Amplified IT, and it cost me $150,000 to have that company come in and help me work through the process on the Google side to integrate third-party utilities to go through, clean it all up, and then prove to those companies that I no longer had any of those videos stored. And that was the incident that kind of helped push me to, like, hey, we're going to start storing all of our critical information in the M365 systems. Nothing that is business essential will be on the Google Workspace environment anymore. And then from there, we built out our DR and then worked with the insurance companies to make sure, like, here's where all of our critical information is. Here's what we need to continue our rhythm of business, to keep educating our students. And it inevitably got to the point where, like, we just mostly moved over to those systems because we just felt more protected. Now, I know this slide is a little bit hard to read, but I wanted to include this anyway. These are all the breakdown and add-on licenses for all the various parts of the M365 stack when you're going from A3 to A5. And it breaks it down by if you're on the older licensing subscriptions to the newer ones. So if you want to take a look at this in your off hours just to kind of see what are all the features, how do they all break down, this is a good way to see it. So I did want to go through another few things real quick because we always get asked these questions. So what is an education qualified user, and how do we typically see this broken up in the EDU sector? So when I'm talking about these licenses, this is not everybody has to be licensed the same way, everybody has to have the same security, be all done all, and that's the end of it. You can break this up based on different job titles and job levels as you're going through this. And so what's really nice is you might want to just start working on the security on like your full-time staff members, your faculty, but like your bus drivers, custodians and stuff, they probably aren't logging into computers, so you probably don't need the same security implemented on them. So it's just really nice to think about when you license a lot of this, you don't have to license everybody, you only have to license the accounts that you're protecting with the policies that you're implementing. Now, on top of all of this, when you purchase that licensing, you also get the equivalent student use benefits. Now, there are some kind of different things in here where you do have to step it up for the student use if you want to use it, but this is just a nice breakdown of what's included if you upgrade or you use one of the step ups and what you get out of it from the student ratio. Here's our wonderful map that breaks it down. I've included this on all of my PowerPoints so far. But on the left-hand side, we've got our A3, and then our A1, our A3, and then the A5 security and A5 compliance. I like to think A5 security revolves around Office 365 and Defender, and A5 compliance revolves around Office 365 and data. So I know I said Office 365 twice, but the the Defender for Office 365 kind of covers both a little bit. And then the other thing too, I always like to reiterate and remind members, when you're doing this in the group management in Azure AD, you can apply policies and they will inherit down. So I know you probably looked at Azure AD and like, man, this is a flat architecture. Like, I really hate trying to deploy policies like this to this one group, and then now I've got to add all these other groups into it. You can create nested groups and apply those policies to them, and it'll actually flow down to those different subgroups underneath. So I always like to reiterate that this is a nice, easy way to break things up in your environment if you so choose. So what are our next steps from here? All right. Well, start small. Choose a few test devices. Choose a first test personnel. Maybe start the trial up in your tenant and bring it online and implement a couple of policies to see how it goes. Like, one thing I always like to preface this with, when you bring it online the first time, you can put this in audit mode. You do not have to put it in block mode where it's immediately going to start doing things. You can put these systems in audit mode so you can see what they're going to do, to give you that comfortability of, man, if I turn this on, is it going to mess with everybody? And then you don't have to worry about that as much. And then be open. Approach this proof of concept as you're working through this and bringing these systems online for the first time. I might have to change what I've done for the past, 15 to 20 years. And I might have to look at a different way. Maybe instead of, always just doing Patch Tuesday and logging in on that weekend to apply servers, I create an automated remediation policy and I let the servers update themselves and then I check on them the following day. Try to be open to this new type of security and how it can be implemented. It might not work the exact same way it has in previous years. So the next piece is to explore. Take the time to learn these tools. It does, like I said earlier, or like we've said earlier, cybersecurity is a journey. It's not an overnight thing. Take the time, learn the tools, go and watch YouTube videos. You can, at the end of this presentation, I have a number of technical resources. There's a dev center that I've given you access, or that I've included in there. And if you go in there, you can spin up your own tenant, play with it, see what it all does, turn on all the features, and have access to it without affecting your production tenant. But use all the tools and ask your Microsoft representatives for information on how to best explore these tools. Then from there, evaluate what you're working on. What are the workloads that you need to make sure that you're implementing? Like, do I need to work on Windows updates? Do I need to have a good update strategy? Is that my main project for the year? And just kind of work through what are my major security things that I want to use this to work on. And then define, what does success look like? All right, well, I started this beginning part of the year and here are my projects. If I get, and we all know that because school gets busy, things happen, level set yourself like, hey, here's what success would be. If I can get through 3 out of 10 of these this year, I'm in a good place because I've at least been able to implement some of these major security pieces. And then from there, simplify it. Like, just because you can do something in the console doesn't mean that you should. So take the time, strategize it. And I always like to say use different testing rings. Like, test the policy on one set of users, see how well after a week how they respond. If everything's fine, scale it up from there, maybe to a building. And then from a building all the way up to the entire environment. And that's also under the validate step, sorry. So test those devices, test your policies, make sure that as you go up through this, that you don't cause yourself a little bit of a pickle. Collect the data and feedback from your users. Reach out to them, ask them like, hey, I've implemented this new security thing. Does it make your life easier? Do you feel more protected, or is it a hindrance? And then that way you can use that. Well, maybe I go about that a different way. Maybe I block it a different way. Or, for example, you can make an app available in company portal on your device versus pushing it out. So that's one thing that you can think about. And then collaborate. Work with your various Microsoft and partner resources. We're all here to help you. We want you to succeed. We want to protect our student data. Like, we want to make sure that you feel confident and comfortable in these products. Feel free to reach out to us. We're all here to help you. And then, it's a process. It's not a solution, and it's not going to be overnight. So just a strategy perspective, I put this together real quick. So typically what we see is Defender for Identity, because when we go from on-premises to adding a cloud infrastructure, we now don't only have to worry about our identities on-prem, we also have to worry about our identities on cloud. So I typically see institutions when they're thinking about their security strategy that they just target identity first. Then from there, they typically think, all right, I've moved some of these files to the cloud, I've moved these different infrastructures there. Well, how do I protect that? So you use Defender for Office 365 for like Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive. And then now that I've worked through that, now I'm going to work on my devices. So how am I going to keep my Windows devices patched, or my Mac or iOS devices patched, updated, and secured, and then work my way up from there. And as you can see, it kind of gives you like device management, endpoint servicing. Just kind of think of it as the way of like, this is a process that you can work through, and like typically identity is the first kind of starting point.
Yeah, and just, one quick point on that, right? Like, everyone's journey is different. So if you want to focus on cloud identity first, but maybe your neighbor is starting on patching first, right? Again, going back to those priorities, there's not a right or wrong way to do any of this, but as long as you are making progress, that's all you need to be focusing on, right? So just identify what those priorities are in your environment. But again, this map, this roadmap, we give you a little visual, but this can look different for everyone. And there's nothing to say that you can't be working on patching while going and putting conditional access policies in place at the same time, right? Two different buckets, but you can absolutely do those at the same time and then go on to something else. So again, progress, not perfection.
Exactly. And also with that is, in case something happens, making sure that you have the processes in place to deal with those situations, because that was the big thing too with me when I was a tech director. I'd always ask, well, what do we do in case we do get breached? And my leadership would go, well, I don't know. Don't we just call the state and don't they fix it? And I'm like, I'm pretty sure that's not how that happens. And the one school that happened to, they replaced all the staff there. So I'm pretty sure I don't want the state to come in and help me fix it. But yeah, so just modernizing security strategy and just try and think about that. Like Garrett said, like this is not a map that be all end all, this is how it has to be. It could look different for every single person or every different institution. So that is the end of our presentation. I did include a survey slide, so if you could please access this. If you want to ask for resources from a dedicated Microsoft representative, we will have access on this form for them to be able to see that and reach out to you. If you want to give us feedback on future things that you'd like to see in the presentations, please let us know. And just feel free to let us know how you think we did on the presentation. On the final slide that I've got, here are all the technical resources that I've included together. I wanted to try and make this as simple as possible. So all the various pieces that we've gone and talked about, a link to those technical resources should be located here, and feel free to use those. But yep, that's today's meeting, and feel free to ask us any questions.